modern governance has failed its people. In times of crisis, it is not just policies, but the moral integrity of leadership that determines the well-being of a nation. I have been deeply reflecting on the state of modern governments and the institutions that shape our lives. In a time where the socio-economic and political landscapes are fraught with challenges, it seems that our leaders have forgotten their most fundamental duty: to protect and uplift every citizen, especially those who are marginalized. This duty is not merely a legal obligation, but a moral one, central to the very essence of governance. As one voice, amidst the countless others who feel abandoned by society and its institutions, I stand here not just for myself, but for all those who are unheard and unseen. My voice is a single droplet in a vast ocean of silence, representing the pain and frustration of many who have been neglected. I have stood there, like any of you, working towards a common future. Yet, with the current circumstances that exist, this common future is out of reach for many of us. And I'm compelled to speak out, because I know the weight of being overlooked, and I understand the profound need for change. In this moment of crisis, I turn to the ancient values that have guided humanity throughout the ages. The Koryos warrior bands, the Irish Fianna, the Gallic Uokori, the Germanic Harias, the Persian Kara, the Lithuanian Karas, and the Vedic Maruts. They embodied more than just martial prowess. They stood for a commitment to communal justice and responsibility. And these ancient warriors were not mere relics of history, but symbols of a deeper truth, that the strength of a society lies in its dedication to the well-being of all its members. By invoking the spirit of these venerable traditions, I call for a return to a form of governance that truly serves its people. In an era where modern systems have faltered, these timeless principles offer us a beacon of hope. This is not just a plea for reform, it is a call to restore the integrity and compassion that should define our shared human experience, to restore the global heritage of justice and warrior ethos. And these ancient warrior bands were not confined to one region, but were part of a broader Proto-Indo-European cultural sphere that spanned across much of Europe and into what is now Ukraine. Ukraine, currently at the heart of profound struggle and resistance, thus symbolizes more than just a geopolitical conflict. The common people unheard in this struggle represent the voice of the marginalized and the neglected across Europe and beyond. Just as the ancient Proto-Indo-European warrior bands transcended regional boundaries to forge a common ethos, so too must we unite in solidarity. From the vast steppes of Ukraine to the ancient territories of the Irish, Gallic, Germanic and other tribes, the spirit of the Koryos transcends modern national boundaries. So let the plight of the common folk become a rallying cry for all of Europe, urging us to stand together and restore a sense of justice and communal responsibility. We should not let Ukraine become just a symbol of the great bloodletting of the European soul, drenching the great mother's wheat with the blood of her sons. As such a terrible war comes with a great cost, for not just those caught in this plight, but for all those touched by the soul of our civilization. The cost of brotherhood being around the corner. The weeping of Demeter can be heard in the wailing of the mothers and children lost. Yet are we not all born out of the same brotherhood and sisterhood, the same soil and wheat?
Une interruption de combat pour signaler une garde inappropriée. Il est bien suivi. Alors, la garde doit permettre de créer le contact, pas de le repousser ou empêcher l'autre d'avoir le contact.
So in a time when our world feels increasingly fragmented, I believe there's a powerful opportunity to build something different. Something that transcends the limitations of nationalism and political divisions. My vision is to create a pan-European movement that unites us not through our differences, but through our shared heritage and collective aspirations. We live in an age where it's all too easy to be boxed into ideological categories, whether left, right, or center. But what if we could step beyond these labels and focus on what truly connects us? It's not about aligning with one political faction or another. It's about uniting people from all walks of life who are ready to move beyond the limitations of current systems. It's about coming together to address the real challenges we face. It's about coming together to address the real challenges we face, from governance to social fragmentation, with a shared commitment and solidarity. For those of us who cherish tradition and history, the warrior ethos and cultural roots symbolize stability and identity. And these values are more than just symbols. They are a reflection of who we are and where we came from. They remind us of the strength and wisdom passed down through generations, offering a solid foundation upon which we can build a better future. And for those of us who champion social justice and human rights, this movement stands for a fair and inclusive society. And by addressing the systemic issues that divide us, we hope to build a more equitable and compassionate community. What it really is about, it's about the role of government and the responsibility and leadership that comes with it. Because it is a government's responsibility to serve and lead, to work through its issues. And the confidence and trust in a government is earned by actions, not by words or empty ideas. Where on a deeper level, despite the efforts of people, including myself, to thrive, if the soil is not there for people to thrive on their own, how could they do that? People are only responsible for so much and can't be expected to solve socio-economic issues that are far beyond their control. That is why there is a government. People can only do so much to take care of themselves. This can't be solved by mere handouts either. Just as the land must be fertile for crops to grow, society must provide the right conditions for its citizens to prosper. Legitimate rule requires the government to serve and protect its people. Failing to do so, the sovereignty goddess withdraws her favor in a symbolic sense. Even in Dutch history, leadership has often been defined by commitment to moral and ethical principles. During the Dutch Golden Age, leaders like During the Dutch Golden Age, leaders like Prince Maurits of Nassau and the statesmen such as Hugo Grotius emphasize the importance of justice, integrity, and civic responsibility, reflecting the nation's values of tolerance and ethical governance. And these historical precedents align with the symbolism of the sovereignty goddess, who embodies this idea that the health and prosperity of the land are intrinsically linked to the justice, integrity, and the virtue of its leaders. And just as historical figures and movements have emphasized moral obligations, contemporary leaders are similarly expected to uphold these principles of our forefathers. The failure to do so, as seen by various scandals and socio-economic issues, suggests a breach of this sacred duty. Thus, the idea that sovereignty and legitimacy are tied to moral obligations remains not only relevant, but is a crucial lens through which to evaluate the legitimacy of leadership. And this historical context reinforces the notion that sovereignty and legitimacy are fundamentally tied to the ethical conduct of leaders, affirming that a government authority is validated by its adherence to justice and integrity. This is also where I want to bring in some philosophical arguments as well. John Locke, in his second treatise of government, argues that governments are established by a social contract, where the primary purpose is to protect the life, liberty, and property of its citizens. Locke maintains that if a government fails to fulfill this duty, it loses its legitimacy. He also emphasizes that citizens consent to governance based on the expectation that the government will act in their interest, and when this contract is broken, the people have a right to resist or challenge the government. The government's failure to address socio-economic issues aligns with Locke's belief that governments should be judged by their actions and the tangible outcomes they provide for their citizens. The sovereignty goddess that I mentioned earlier, I feel, is also important here. She is an ancient archetype representing the land, its people, and the rightful order of governance. She embodies the principle that the health and prosperity of the land are intrinsically linked to the justice, integrity, and virtue of its leaders, how I had said. So when the rulers are just and the land is well governed, she grants prosperity and peace. However, when the leaders fail in their duties, the land and its people suffer. So the well-being and health of a people reflect the health of the country. With that, a country's duty is to serve its citizens, and thus treating one's people fairly and help them prosper is key for the stability of the realm. The inability of the government to solve issues should not just lead to them pushing that onto people, as if it is now only their responsibility, or pushing things from the main government to local governments and then to its people, who obviously can't deal with the complexity of the larger issues. Where Rousseau, in the Social Contract, introduces the concept of the general will, the collective good of society. According to Rousseau, the government's role is to align its actions with this general will, meaning it should act in the interest of all citizens. And when a government prioritizes certain groups over others or neglects its responsibilities to marginalized individuals, it violates this principle. Where Hobbes argues for a strong centralized authority in Leviathan. Yet he too recognizes that the legitimacy of that authority is based on the government's ability to maintain order and protect the people. A government that fails to address the socio-economic needs of its population risks descending into chaos, something Hobbes warned against. And in this context, a government that neglects its duty to create stability through just actions and sound policies undermines its own legitimacy. Now, I'm not here to make any judgments for you. I let this judgment to any man and woman alike to make up their own mind about where we stand as a people. Yet throughout history, we have seen leaders rise to meet the ethical obligations of their roles. In the Dutch Golden Age, leaders such as Prince Maurits of Nassau and Hugo Grotius embodied justice and integrity, which laid the foundation for a prosperous and stable society. These historical examples remind us that governance is not just about policy, it is about the moral duty to care for all citizens, especially the most vulnerable. Prince Maurits of Nassau was a key military leader and statesman in the Dutch Republic during the 80 Years' War. And he is renowned for his role in the military innovations that contributed to the Dutch success against the Spanish Empire. And he was not only a military tactician, but also a reformer who emphasized discipline, strategy, and the effective use of resources. And his approach to leadership and military reform reflected a commitment to the well-being of his people and the pursuit of justice through effective governance and strategy. So his leadership was instrumental in uniting the Dutch provinces and fostering a sense of national identity and purpose, where Hugo Grotius was a Dutch jurist and philosopher, often considered one of the founding figures of international law, and his works such as the De Jure Belli Pacis on the law of war and peace laid the groundwork for modern concepts of international law and human rights. His ideas about the natural law and the moral foundations of law emphasize the inherent duty of nations and leaders to uphold justice and protect the rights of individuals, and his assertion that moral principles underpin legal systems aligns with the view that governance must be guided by moral obligations to all citizens, especially the marginalized. Yet, one of the most significant examples of government failure when it comes to this in recent Dutch history is the childcare benefit scandal. In this scandal, thousands of families, many from immigrant backgrounds, were wrongfully accused of fraudulently claiming childcare benefits. As a result, these families were forced to repay large sums of money, driving many into severe financial hardship. The Dutch government failed in its fundamental duty to protect its most vulnerable citizens, as this scandal disproportionately affected lower-income families and immigrants. Through this, it demonstrated how an overzealous bureaucracy can lead to severe injustice and the marginalization of already vulnerable groups. The lack of due process and the failure to correct the injustice in time showed a serious breach of trust between the government and its citizens. In the Toeslagenaffaire, for example, the wrong persecution of innocent families not only represented a massive bureaucratic failure, but also a moral one. It showed that the government was incapable of protecting its most vulnerable citizens and instead perpetuated harm. And by shifting blame onto individuals and failing to correct its mistakes swiftly, the government broke its duty to uphold fairness and justice.
I can smell the failure!
And if this is not worse enough, the Netherlands is currently also facing a significant housing shortage as well, with high property prices and rental costs making it increasingly difficult for young people and low-income families to afford housing. The government's failure to adequately address this issue through policy reforms, housing construction, or regulation of the rental market has exacerbated inequalities and led to social unrest. The housing crisis reflects a failure to provide the conditions necessary for citizens to secure stable living conditions, and the inability to regulate the housing market or promote affordable housing is a direct failure to ensure the basic welfare of citizens, which is a key role of government. Where the Dutch government also struggled to meet climate change goals, particularly concerning the nitrogen emission crisis, which has led to significant environmental degradation. Farmers have protested rightfully en masse against restrictive government policies, which have been seen as unfairly targeting their livelihoods without providing sufficient support or alternatives for them to adapt. In this case, the government has failed both in its duty to protect the environment and in balancing the needs of its citizens, particularly our farmers. The government's approach has led thus to tensions and societal divisions, showing a lack of foresight and leadership in addressing long-term sustainability in a way that includes all stakeholders, which includes the farmers. Where over the years, austerity measures in the Netherlands and UK have led to underfunding of public services, such as education, healthcare, and social welfare. Cuts to these vital services have left many people, particularly those from lower socio-economic backgrounds, without adequate support. Long waiting times in healthcare and overcrowded classrooms in schools are some of the ongoing issues. By underfunding essential public services, the government has failed to ensure that all citizens have access to basic rights like quality healthcare, education, and social security. And this has contributed to a widening gap between different socio-economic groups and failed to provide the necessary support for many citizens to thrive. Where the final nail in the coffin is the mental health crisis with the youth, because mental health services for young people in the Netherlands have been severely underfunded, leading to long waiting lists for treatment. Many young people in need of mental health care are just left without support, often for months or even years, which has been exacerbated by the pressures of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the government's neglect in providing adequate mental health services, especially for young people, is a failure to protect the psychological well-being of its citizens. And this neglect undermines the government's duty to ensure access to essential healthcare services for all, undermining with this also the future of the nation by neglecting care for those struggling with their mental health. And the government's inability to solve these crises could be seen either as a sign of incompetence, failing to provide effective leadership and governance, or as a reluctance to act due to vested interests, bureaucratic inertia, or political pressures. But in either case, this reveals a breach in the moral obligation to lead. In political theory, particularly in the works of Rousseau and Montesquieu, legitimate authority depends on serving the common good. When leaders focus on short-term political gains, maintaining power or placating specific interest groups, they neglect their responsibility to serve society as a whole. The housing crisis, environmental and mental health challenges are emblematic of this, where leaders failed to implement policies that serve the long-term well-being of citizens. The reality of many current leaders: corrupt, neglectful, self-serving. So in contemporary terms, legitimacy is not just about winning elections or holding office. It's about earning the trust of the people by governing fairly and effectively. The current failures in Dutch governance highlights how a modern government has neglected its duty to foster the well-being of all citizens, particularly the marginalized and vulnerable. The deeper governance problems seen in the Netherlands require more than just policy reforms. They demand a re-evaluation of leadership, accountability, and the reassertion of the government's foundational duties. Because without significant change, the government risks losing its moral claim to authority. Now imagine instead the assembly of the tribe, the thing of old. This ancient assembly, found in various cultures such as the Norse Althing, the Germanic Thing, or the Irish Cattle Rate Councils, were more than just a meeting of leaders. It was the embodiment of direct democracy, where every voice could be heard and where decisions were made collectively, reflecting the will and needs of the entire community. This historical assembly was not merely a political institution, it was a symbol of participatory governance and communal responsibility. In these assemblies, the strength of the tribe lay in its unity and the active involvement of its members. The thing represented a system where justice was not handed down from above, but crafted through dialogue and mutual respect. It was a space where each individual's voice contributed to the common good, and where decisions were made with the well-being of all in mind. As we confront the failings of modern systems, let us remember that governance should be a process of inclusion and participation, where the voices of all, especially those who are unheard and unseen, are valued and acted upon. The assembly of the tribe teaches us that true strength comes from unity and collective action, not from isolated or top-down decisions. And the Koryos has always been the backbone of this assembly of the tribe, the Tuat. The scholar W. Burkert pointed out that the name Apollo probably came from the Doric appella, meaning public assembly. This is also visible with Diana, Mars, and Quirinus, all being linked to the public assembly. Quirinus, the peaceful Mars, was associated with the tribe and assembly of all Roman people, as much as Diana was too. Quirinus and Mars really being one deity, Mars Quirinus, consisting of both a peaceful societal function and an active and dynamic warrior function linked to wild animals like wolves. All of this, in that sense, bringing back in the youth of the tribe, but also later the warriors of the tribe, next to playing an important role for outcasts and scapegoats to reclaim their individuality and personal power. The Koryos pattern, while not inherently destructive like the unrestrained manifestations of the Wotan archetype, draws from the same well of primal energy. By understanding the historical context in which Wotan emerged, we gain insights into the potential consequences of untamed archetypal forces. The Koryos, in its conscious and intentional form, offers a channel for the expression of youthful vitality, in a constructive manner, steering clear of the chaotic manifestations associated with Wotan. The concept of bands of young warriors with a dual role, both living within and apart from society, is widespread in various Indo-European contexts. Personal responsibility, honor, and communal well-being connects with the Proto-Indo-European warrior bands and the values of early societies such as the Celtic Fianna, Germanic warbands, and Scythian, Sarmatian, or Steppe nomad warrior traditions. And these cultures valued loyalty to the group, the protection of the weak, and leadership based on merit and integrity. The Koryos were composed of adolescent males from 12 to 13 up to 18 to 19 years of age, usually coming from prominent families and initiated together into manhood as an age-class cohort. And after undergoing painful trials to enter the group, they were sent away to live as landless warriors in the wild for a number of years, 4 to 9 years, within a group ranging from 2 to 12 members. The young males went without possession other than their weapons, living on the edge of their host society, and the Koryos were seen as being closely connected to the gods, especially thunder gods, and were believed to possess supernatural powers and abilities. The Koryos were believed to be particularly active during the winter months, when the world was at its darkest and the forces of chaos and destruction were believed to be at their strongest. During this time, the Koryos would engage in various forms of ritual activity, including hunting, feasting, and dancing, as a way of invoking the powers of the gods and strengthening their own abilities. Where another intriguing facet of the Koryos tradition is its potential connection to musical instruments reminiscent of the ancient Greek askalos, such as the bagpipe-like instruments created from the whole hides of sheep, goats, dogs, or cows. Additionally, there were flute-like instruments similar to the aulos, which originated in the Neolithic period. The aulos, known as the tibia to the Romans, was a wind instrument in ancient Greece, commonly depicted in various forms of art and supported by archaeological evidence. Much like the great Highland bagpipe, the aulos has a history of being used for martial music. While the term aulos is often translated as flute or double flute, it was predominantly double-reeded, and its sound was described as penetrating, insistent, and exciting, bearing a closer resemblance to the bagpipes. Interestingly, the Celtic Highlanders had later developed their own version of the bagpipe connected to warriors, drawing possible connections to these ancient instruments. Next to this, the lyre, a Bronze Age wind instrument found in Scandinavia, the cornix, a type of Celtic trumpet, but also the more known bagpipes, all played a role in ritual and religious practices, such as ceremonies, feasts, and other communal gatherings and martial use. Members of the Koryos initially served as young unmarried males, without possessions before their eventual incorporation into the Techtve. We can also see this in the distinction between Mars and Kyrenes. With the Koryos tradition, there is also, in the later descendants of it, a continuous theme of warriors connected to sacred dances and hunting or warrior rites linked to both the thunder god and the goddess, which can have both a nurturing side but sometimes is also depicted as a wrathful feminine. Often then this feminine figure takes the form of a she-wolf or she-goat who nurtures the infant, where within this final ritual the young men who have returned from the Koryos die only to be reborn later as a man that has been integrated into society. In modern context, the Koryos bands and their mythological connections offer a powerful framework to address contemporary issues of leadership, justice, and societal reintegration. The symbolic role of the Koryos as young protectors and their passage through rites of death and rebirth holds deep relevance, particularly in a time when many feel disconnected, marginalized, and in search of meaning within societal structures. These ancient warrior bands, serving as protectors of the tribe, represent the phase of transformation where the young, unrooted, and disenfranchised members of society undertake a journey that not only tests their courage but also reshapes their identity. This process culminates in their eventual integration into the broader tribe, representing their transition from wanderers and outcasts to respected, fully fledged members of the community. In the modern world, this narrative mirrors the challenges faced by those who feel alienated or abandoned by society, struggling to find their place and purpose. It reflects the journey of individuals and groups who seek to reintegrate into a system that often excludes them. And by tying this ancient tradition to modern governance, we can view the Koryos as embodying the fight against injustice and societal imbalance. The sovereignty goddess, as a guiding feminine figure, represents the principles of justice, virtue, and social harmony. In the same way that she guided warriors through death and rebirth, she symbolizes the nurturing and and empowering force needed to heal modern societal rifts. In ancient myths, the goddess not only guided warriors through trials, but also had the power to guide outcasts and scapegoats back into society, facilitating their reintegration. Her role, in this sense, was both maternal and judicial, both nurturing and exacting justice. And in today's society, this translates into the need for leaders and protectors who are willing to go through personal transformation, sacrificing the old structures that perpetuate inequality or marginalization, and emerge as new leaders devoted to justice, equality, and community welfare. When applying this to modern issues, the Koryos band becomes a symbol for movements that challenge unjust systems and protect the vulnerable. And the sovereignty goddess in this context symbolizes not only the moral authority to oversee this transformation, but also the empowerment of those on the margins to rise and take part in this new social order.